partnerships at Indiegogo. We produced this webinar in partnership with Arrow Electronics. Our speaker for today is Piers Callanan, Virtual Field Applications Engineer at Arrow Electronics. You can see him there on camera. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, the webinar will be recorded and we will have the recording within 1 to 2 days. Second, we will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation, so feel free to save your questions and we'll answer as many of them as we can when we get to the conclusion of the presentation. Finally, if you have technical issues hearing the audio, please try restarting your browser or computer. All right, first, I'd like to give everyone a quick overview of why Indiegogo and Arrow have teamed up to offer this webinar. We partnered with Arrow to offer the Arrow Certification Program, which is a free program that gives tech entrepreneurs the necessary tools and services to bring your ideas to life. If your product idea has an electronics and/or software component, you can apply for the program to access a variety of benefits at any stage, as seen here. Our program launched in 2016, and to date, we've had more than 12,000 entrepreneurs join the program. Campaigns that have joined the Arrow Certification Program and are certified at launch raise 87% more funds on average than those that are not in the program, and are 4 times more likely to hit their funding goal. Finally, something amazing is that Arrow has given away $1.7 million in flash funding, cash prizes to Indiegogo campaigners to date. There's also flash funding being given away this month in June, so if you haven't applied, feel free to do so. Other benefits include $1,000 off of components and services that can be purchased through Arrow. We also highlight Arrow certified campaigns in our Indiegogo newsletter. You can also access manufacturing support, supply chain, and logistics support. You also receive a badge on your Indiegogo campaign page that tells backers that your design has been reviewed and verified as feasible for manufacturing by the Arrow team. So that's enough about the Arrow certification program. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to go through why build a prototype, prototyping stages, tackling electronics, putting it all together, and then finally the Q&A. Why build a prototype? So this really ties into backer trust. You want to raise funds and build an audience, right? In order to do that, you need backer trust. First of all campaigns in Indiegogo's tech and innovation category with physical products are required to identify their stage of product development. And if you select that you're on the prototyping stage as opposed to concept stage or manufacturing stage, you have to have a working version of your physical product that successfully functions. If it works, then you earn backer trust and therefore funds. Campaigns that have working types at the time of launch raise on average 186% more than campaigns that don't. Also, backers aren't the only ones who want to see a prototype. If you have a prototype, you have the potential to get media coverage and publicity. It's as simple as that. And that media coverage obviously gets you exposure to more backers. That just about covers why you need a prototype. Now turning it over to Piers to discuss prototyping stages.
Thanks, Joan. So we'll go over the prototyping stages before we get into some of the details of how to build and then getting to production. So first off is going to be kind of the factors you're looking at when building a prototype and planning to build a prototype. And really it all comes down to your product, the team, and then the resources you have available. So if you have a very complex design, but you have limited experience, you're generally going to, look to hire a team or at least involve more before really taking those next steps. If you do have the experience and it's not so complicated, you can definitely work on your own design and create those layouts if you have electronic experience. So the first real stage of prototyping is a proof of concept. And really what this is proving your design and features of your product. So a lot of times, like you see here, it's on a breadboard, potentially using development boards, you kind of using jumper wires to get everything together. So it's not going to have that look and feel of the final product that's kind of in your mind and what's gotten you, excited about your product. But this shows, it's doable, and then you can actually start kind of tweaking features, and then you can even start getting customer feedback, at least friends and family feedback, how the device operates. This is really, shows backers' inner workings. So if this is all you have the ability to produce, it's still really good to show backers, that you're making progress in the development. Which brings us to visual prototype, which is kind of the other side of the spectrum. This is strictly visual, so if you have a phone, it's just how the phone looks, but it wouldn't actually turn on. So you don't have any of the features, it's not functional, it's a three-dimensional, something you can have in your hand, and really, backers are trying to see this as well, that it's that physical aspect that people are going to carry around. People, half the time care about what stuff looks like more than what it actually does. And then when you put those two together, you do get a presentation prototype. So you'd have most of the features and almost a final appearance to this. So what you're going to do is, put those two together, generally using 3D printing, maybe some cheap plastic molding that you can purchase online. If you have skills, you could do this in your garage as well. Get that look and feel, put that proof of concept in an enclosure, and then show it. It's a great way to get feedback. This is the most common view when people have a device on Indiegogo. The backers get to see this, and then they get to trust that you're making progress and you're really close to manufacturing. Which brings us to the factory prototype. This is going to be the closest to a look and feel of your final product. It might be a first board run like you see being made in this picture. So it's a produced, fully manufactured, almost identical to your final thing. You might still have a 3D printed enclosure that you've sanded down and it's pristine, or you might have had an opportunity to actually get certain molds done, and then it's kind of that first step of having that physical enclosure. Again, a great way to show backers how close you are to shipping them a product. And then this also gives you kind of the feel for larger production, so you know how to source some of these components, how to work with manufacturers, and then how to move on to full production in those finished stages. So now we can dive into some more details on actually tackling these electronics and some of the stages that go with it. So the first thing is your initial design. This is either the look and feel or how you're starting with that proof of concept. So on electronics, you're looking at schematics or wireframes. What you're really doing here is trying to lay out the components that you're going to need for production. You start to get an idea on cost and how much work it's really going to take. All of a sudden, if you're dealing with 200 components and it seems a little overwhelming, you might look to hire someone with more experience. And same on the mechanical side, you're looking at that visual enclosure, physical enclosure. So it's either a blueprint or a CAD file that you're working with online, potentially in free softwares that are available. This is really those first steps to get that proof of concept done. And then moving on to the secondary design, you're taking those schematics and really turning it into a layout that a manufacturer could produce. Same with the mechanical and web design. It's stuff that is really getting you towards that factory prototype. And then once you're there, you're checking on quality assurance. So if you did make a couple prototype boards in electronics, if you've made those at a manufacturer, you're going to check those, make sure everything is in working order. There's no bad solder lines, making sure nothing's shorted out, checking for full functionality. Same with your 3D print. You don't want rough edges if it's being handled on a day-to-day basis by your user, making sure it looks and feels the way you want it to. So to kind of give a little more insight on some of those topics just talked about, the schematics are really a layout it's the first layout of the components you're using. So a lot of times if you're using development boards, you can actually find schematics of those development boards and learn how the components are working together. As you can kind of see in the picture, you might have a major component here that has to send a lot of different traces to different components. So what those traces are going to do is maybe send signal, send power, and then you get to really figure out how all of your pieces are interconnected and how they're going to work. And then this is something you can pass on to manufacturers or an engineer to help you with the next step, which is going to be your board layout. Your board layout is a kind of full-blown version of your schematic. You're going to add different things like vias, you're adding different connectors. This is something you'll see, what most people think about as a motherboard in a computer. It's that green board and all your electronic devices. You're making sure those traces aren't crossing over each other, making sure your signals are accurate. It's kind of a lot of different features that go into that, but this is kind of that first step, and the output of this is what you're going to pass on to a manufacturer to get your final boards made, that prototype board. And then what you're also going to need in an output of your schematic and your board layout is going to be a bill of materials. So this is all the components you're going to use. It's very extensive. It's a detailed list. It's what's required, getting prototypes made, and it gives you your idea on the cost of your entire device. And it's important to have an accurate bill of materials for those reasons. You can use this bill of materials to get pricing from suppliers, just like Arrow will give you competitive pricing on these parts, compared to other suppliers, and then you get to discuss with manufacturers if you need specific components that are rare. You're checking the quality of these components, making sure there aren't long lead times. As a lot of people are aware, passive components have been difficult in the past year or so. So you're kind of working with someone, or at least keeping tabs yourself, to make sure that these are going to be available and the prices aren't through the roof, which makes your device either too hard to sell because your price is too high, or it's not feasible because you don't have the funding. So let's move on, putting everything together and actually making that product. So once you feel like you're ready, these are the main factors in factory prototype. So you want to have a complete board layout like we discussed to make that printed circuit board. You really want to be able to test the feasibility, making sure those boards are good quality from your manufacturer. You want to make sure your BOM is complete and all those components are available, especially if you're ready for production and you have a funding for production. You need to make sure you can buy all those components in bulk. And then, of course, if you have an enclosure, you want to make sure that is fully designed out, and we'll start working with a manufacturer on that as well. And then, of course, the major thing, a cost of a prototype. This is definitely dependent on your device. As long as PCBs go, the bigger it is, generally the more expensive it is because you have more components to deal with, and there's more machine work that has to be done to create that stencil. And then on the final product, redefining and building for scale, you really want to focus on this. The cost of the prototype may be large when you're talking about paying X amount of dollars for one unit, but you really want to build for scale, and cutting costs when you're building 1,000 or 10,000 units is really more important. That's the cost that's going to get passed on to your consumer. And if your cost is high, their cost is high, and it might make it harder to sell. So you want to make sure that your BOM is good and those components are available, and potentially substitute for lower cost alternatives. This is also when you'll engage with a contract manufacturer. So they might do 10 to 100 boards or prototypes for you, but they also might be able to do 100,000. So you're setting up these relationships to deal with high production, high quantities in production. They might give you technical advice that you might have one issue with one of the features, a little cross communication between components that are creating issues. They might be able to help you solve this because they're going to work with you to produce those units. So they really want to see you have a successful product. And then you're going to have all of these contacts in different areas as well. So beyond that, and maybe second revisions, you want to add a feature, small tweaks. They're going to be able to be a hands-on helper for you, and then as well as being able to help you source components and produce those in the long run. So this is where the Arrow certification is really a benefit to you. You get an engineer like myself to help you through the stages of these prototypes, through production, and then even through second iterations and another round of funding and another round of production. So getting Arrow certified technology, you get this badge on your Indiegogo page, and you have, of course, the benefits that Joan said earlier. Potential flash funding helps you really get to that production stage. And then, of course, we have our link at the bottom, additional resources here. So if you want help with bill of materials, there's other webinars and AMAs that we've done in the past. These should all be a good benefit. And of course, applying to the program, get an Arrow contact and an Indiegogo contact in the future. We can help you with these questions. So now we'll open it up to the chats, and I'll let Joan kind of relay some of these questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Pierce, for walking us through the prototyping presentation. So first question is from Ken. He says, I have a patent pending product that needs engineering assistance to get us to prototype. I have talked with eInfochips, but it seems our forecast didn't meet their typical requirements to engage. How would you advise someone who's just trying to begin this process?
Yeah, Ken, that's a great question. And of course, I want to learn more on the specifics of your project. But if you do have patent pending, obviously you've kind of had some strides forward. Companies like eInfochips generally are on the higher dollar amount, but we can definitely find partners that are within your range and able to help. But if you apply to the program, you'll get in touch with me and we can discuss some of those next steps.
Thanks, Pierce. Praneet asks, at what stage does Arrow assist with getting in touch with the contract manufacturer? So when would you say that they need to, which prototyping stage do they need to be at in order to be connected to a CM?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Generally, the contract manufacturers are really only engaged when some of those final files and production is in your future. Of course, we do quote, especially with being the partner of Indiegogo. We try to do it as early as possible because then you get an idea how much it's going to cost for that production scale. If you're talking about 1,000 or 10,000 units for quotes, then you know what to charge on Indiegogo, so you're at least breaking even, potentially making money on that first campaign. But generally, you'll look at those board layout files, so Gerber CAD files, and the same for mechanical. You want those kind of final files as well.
So a question from Peter, who's based in London, UK. Is the Arrow certification program available outside the USA? And I'm happy to answer that one. Yes, the Arrow certification program is open to entrepreneurs around the world. There are certain benefits that are available in select countries, such as flash funding. So flash funding is available in the UK. It's also available in a variety of European countries, Israel as well, France, Germany, etc. So you can check out all of those countries on the flash funding terms page on our partnership page. But in general, yes, the Arrow certification program, at minimum, if you qualify, it's open to tech entrepreneurs around the world. And in order to qualify, it's not about so much geographic location, it's just more about your product if it has an electronic and or software component. So, okay, great. Another question from John. So Pierce, this one for you. Do you have any suggestions for CAD programs where they don't have to pay thousands of dollars?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can get really expensive. And I do kind of see some of those comments in there. I see Onshape listed. That actually is a great option. They do have a free cloud version, then there's small increments to pay for more features. In entrepreneurship, actually, the SolidWorks does have an entrepreneur market that I believe is 12 months free SolidWorks. So something like that is great. But of course, after the 12 months, you're a little bit stuck. And of course, you might fall in love with it, which is their whole point. And then you're stuck with a couple $1,000s for that. But yeah, I would definitely try Onshape. There are a few others out there. I'd kind of play around with it. If you haven't used it, sometimes it's a little easier to just kind of play and see which one you like. And in my experience, I started with SolidWorks because of school and I had to play around with a lot. And I felt like Onshape was fairly similar to SolidWorks in the way it interacts. So that's kind of why I stuck with it in a free platform.
Okay. A question from David regarding smart products. Does Arrow Flash Funding help fund the Indiegogo case? So I'm happy to take this one. So yes, if you are certified through the Arrow certification program, program and you meet all of the other requirements funding, as in you're in a country where flash funding is offered and available, then you basically have a chance, an opportunity to win flash funding. And in order to also qualify for this, you do need to have a live Indiegogo campaign. And if you end up being selected as the winner of Aero Flash funding, the funding would go toward, it would be simply added to your Indiegogo campaign page in terms of funds raised. I will say that also not only is there the flash funding that Aero offers for all qualified entrepreneurs in the Aero certification program, but we also have another partner, AT&T, and they've specifically allocated $250,000 in flash funding for smart products with cellular connectivity. So that's exclusively for the IoT entrepreneurs out there. That's a separate pool of flash funding. So just wanted to mention that as well. All right, there's a lot of questions coming in. All right, so Tony asks, if I were to order my BOM parts through Aero as one bulk order, what percentage discount might one expect? A significant discount from what? From a competitor such as DigiKey's website. So I did want to mention another thing before, Pierce, I hand that over to you. Again, if you earn the benefits through the Aero certification program, you actually get $1,000 in free components through aero.com. So that's pretty nice. And you also get additional discounts. I believe it's like 10% off. But do you want to talk, Pierce, about kind of like how Aero is able to offer competitive pricing in comparison to competitors?
Yeah, definitely. So, Joan, you're right. Just by applying to the program, you get 10% on aero.com. And if you're talking about us kind of versus DigiKey, we do actually price match all of our components. So if you did somehow find something cheaper on DigiKey, we do actually price match and then just cut it there. I'd have to look into if that 10% can be added on top of that price cut, but there's no way that you can spend more money on our site if you've seen lower cost components. And then if you're talking about bulk orders through the certification program, once you are certified, you do get a dedicated sales representative that I stay engaged with, and then you kind of have a team here at Aero that's going to help you look at those larger quantities and try to leverage our relationship for some lower prices.
Pragya asks, I need to come up with a prototype for my research aging in place. Do you support individual researchers? What are some beginner resources for someone just starting on prototyping?
Yeah, definitely. So what we'll do is kind of engage, and based on your needs, we'll recommend different platforms, different things that we've seen, kind of use our resources within Aero and then just our experience ourselves to kind of put you in the right direction and assist through that. But of course, it can be very user specific, customer specific. So, it's better to kind of have the conversation first and then deal with what's the best next steps for you.
I'm catching up with some questions in the chat log. This is a very common question. So Ken asks, does Aero sign NDAs with companies, entrepreneurs, startups before engagement? Pierce, what's the answer?
That's definitely a yes. So it's kind of first step in applying to the program is to have a mutual NDA, and actually covers beyond just our conversation. It covers anyone that we would ever work with. And of course, if you still wanted to, you could sign individual NDAs with external partners, but you are covered throughout.
And then Omer asks, is reverse engineering a good way to improve something?
I guess it depends. Generally, yes, I guess. You could reverse engineer to figure out how the base operation works and then make additional features. Really depends on what you're looking at. We do see some people do it. Sometimes it actually takes more time and effort, which equals money, to reverse engineer instead of just starting over.
And then we had a question. Jonas Buxton asks, I found an electronics board on Alibaba that is 99% close to what we are looking for. Would you recommend that they take that route?
Potentially, obviously, money's a big consideration when you're going to market. You definitely need to be careful with the rights on ownership. You know, if they're just a reseller and you're fine to, you know, slap a box on it and sell it as your own, potentially. But of course, someone could do the same as you, and then you guys have exactly the same product. Potentially, it might look a little different, and then you are also kind of restricted in using that company. So if all of a sudden that company disappears, you have no product, which is generally why we encourage people to design their own product, or at least have the files where they could get it made by different contract manufacturers.
And Fritz asked earlier, how do the folks in the Aero certification, does the Aero team in the Aero certification program, how do they select the idea that entrepreneurs are going to work on? So I can just give a little bit of an overview of that process. The entrepreneur, the startups, you know, those attending this webinar, you are expected to have the idea. Aero doesn't provide, you come into the program with your idea. And then in terms of just really qualification, it's not really so much, you know, Aero selecting. There's just program requirements. Your idea cannot defy the laws of physics. So that is a basic one. And then really essentially going back to that definition, it just does need to have an electronics and or software component. That's what the Aero team, their expertise is in. So this is meant for, you know, obviously the majority of hardware entrepreneurs. So, you know, if you want more information on the exact legal terms, you know, feel free to check out our partnership page, which is over here. So, and we've got all kind of like the requirements there and the countries for flash funding. So, all right, next question. Danny asks, we always bought components like Arduino and sensors from eBay. Once our prototype is complete, in terms of hardware and software, can Aero help us to customize the circuit board for manufacturing? If so, what is the average cost? Pierce?
Yeah, so I'll kind of break this down into two parts. You can also buy Arduino and sensors, all those kind of components on Aero, and start working towards, you know, your own prototype, your own board. Our team specifically won't do kind of a redesign for that circuit board. But we can put you in touch with, you know, select partners that can help that. And again, as far as costs, it's very kind of project specific. So if it's a really easy thing where it's just, you know, maybe a single Wi-Fi communication, very little processing, not much going on, it's definitely lower cost than, you know, redesigning, you know, a smart coffee maker or something like that. So it is kind of specific, but we could definitely talk about, you know, what it is, what you're using, and the ways to move away from Arduinos and actually make your own board.
So we had a question from Chris. Does Aero assist with the design / prototyping of IoT connectivity, or is that on us as a company to flesh out? So maybe Pierce, you can talk about what Aero does do in terms of products with IoT and connectivity.
Definitely. So I'll kind of talk about this one a little more in general. So as far as designing and prototyping, we offer recommendations is kind of the main point, where going back to that development board as well, you know, we're going to recommend different components that actually replace those boards. Of course, on boards like that, you have extra components that you're probably not using, which is just extra cost. So we'll recommend on the major components what to use, and then we'll help you in the product selection and establishing those partners. But again, not really doing the kind of schematics and board layouts that you would need to push for production. And of course, we do help you with the actual prototyping aspect, getting those delivered to you.
And then we have a question from John. If I need help with a specific manufacturer for example, microchip or ADI, can Aero help me get in contact with specialists?
Yeah, most definitely. Because our partnerships, Analog Devices is actually a partner of the program, so I have direct contacts with them. And then as far as going outside of our direct partners, as far as considering the Aero certification program, we do have field engineers that are located in your area that either have direct expertise with those product lines, or we can look to get you someone that's actually in microchip to discuss the questions that you have.
And then Ali asks, is it better to make a concept video or build a prototype first? What would you recommend?
I guess I would say that depends on which skill set you have. If you have the skill set to build a prototype, yeah, it would kind of lead into a video as well. But if you're really good with, Illustrator and you could make a mock-up of what it would look like, that's probably just as valuable. Really just showing backers what the device would look like, what are the features, is really the main goal.
Then we've got a question related to bombs here. So this is from Chris. It says, I'm currently prototyping hardware, particularly clothing, and a manufacturer/part number is needed for the bomb. But they don't yet have a permanent relationship or partnership with those companies providing those parts. So why is this needed at my stage by Aero? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the bomb, like the importance of having those part numbers for a bomb, and what do you do when you have like a non-technical component?
Yeah, of course not, cotton isn't going to have a part number, but when you're referring to the electronic parts, you need the part numbers to compare pricing, you need to look at availability for stock, and one of the major checks that we do is long-term production as well. So sometimes the cheapest component might actually become unavailable in 6 months' time. So yeah, you might be great for making your prototypes, but when you're ready to actually set off and do large production, that part is unavailable, and then you get stuck in a redesign or at least a delay trying to find a replacement. So that's really why those components are important.
And then we have a follow-up question from Jonas. What do you recommend? Should they look for already designed and made boards on Alibaba to avoid designing their own? What would you recommend to someone starting out?
I would always recommend trying to design your own board. It gives you the flexibility to make your own design decisions, as well as having that independence to look and work with any contract manufacturer that works for you versus being stuck with that single component. If you have to always buy it from that one person for a viable business, it kind of puts you in a tough place. And once you're actually, if it does kind of build steam, become successful, you don't know if they're going to double the price on you. You're kind of putting yourself in a position where you're dependent on them. So I always recommend, even if it takes a little more time, some more money, designing your own and getting yourself in a position that you are in control.
And then a question from Jovi. Can Aero help with solid-state electricity generator prototype development? So that's a mouthful.
You would have to look into the specifics. As far as your specific product, the answer is most likely yes. But of course, it's a little too specific to talk about broadly. So again, kind of apply to the program, and then we can talk about it in detail.
They're very specific to people's unique product. So we do encourage you to join the Aero certification program, and then we'll be able to give you more detailed feedback. John has a question here. What are you recommending to entrepreneurs for manufacturing? Is manufacturing in China the best bet for full-scale production? So both mass production as well as prototype production. What do you?
Yeah, so it's actually a little less about the location. Of course, Chinese manufacturers do generally run on the less expensive side, but when you're talking about production, there's different things that you have to consider, and it's actually the environment in which your prototypes or the boards are made. You want good air quality, consistent humidity. There's certain things that aren't regulated in certain facilities that are in others. That's actually what's important for the reliability of your product. If you do kind of run tests, sometimes those cheaper manufacturers, if you produce 10 prototypes, only 4 or 5 of them actually work. If you're spending, $10,000 and 5,000 of that is completely wasted, it's not actually cheaper. So you might as well go with a higher cost but higher reliability manufacturer. So there's just different things to consider. But we have our preferred partners that we'll recommend to you, we'll communicate with. Generally what we do is we actually quote all of them at the same time, and we just get you the lowest cost because we all know they're of equal quality.
Thank you, Pierce. We do have a question from Eben Ray. Can you address the issue of fundraising for a non-consumer product? So I'm happy to talk about that, actually. As some of you may know, Indiegogo is a crowdfunding platform. So you do not have to raise the funds for a consumer product. You can certainly run a campaign on Indiegogo for a non-consumer product. It's the success of your campaign will depend on how your ability to reach backers for your particular product and give them an incentive to back your campaign. So you're certainly welcome to do that. Also, you are eligible again for the AIR certification program, even with a non-consumer product, as long as it fulfills kind of the other requirements that we've already discussed. So, okay, great. A few more questions here. Oh, Danny has this question. What software development tool do you recommend for IoT products?
So of course that depends on kind of what software you're looking at. We do have some design tools on Aero.com, and then again it goes with kind of what you're working with. Of course, if you're doing some development on a Raspberry Pi, they have their own interface. So it really depends on what your code is looking like, but we can explore that and make recommendations for your product.
We had a couple questions from people, asking, how do they complete the AIR certification process? So let me just walk you through that overview. The first thing to do is, go to this URL right here. We'll also be sending it out in a post-webinar follow-up email. So if you go check out our partnership page, there is a join the program application form. So, read the terms and conditions, fill the form out, and that's really step one. If you have already joined the program and, I noticed some person said that they were not able to follow up and complete the process, then just follow up with by emailing Indiegogo@aero.com. So, and you can restart the process there. Once you've filled out the form, you will be contacted within a few business days. And you have an initial consultation with an Aero rep, and they can give you an overview of all of the steps necessary. As already mentioned, Aero, a mutual NDA is signed, so all of your IP remains your IP. And then as you move through the process, completing, for example, a bill of materials review, and Aero reviews your design, you can complete the Aero certification process and be eligible potentially for a chance at flash funding. So, okay, great. Any more technical questions here? I see. Let's see. David has questions regarding some of the experts, Launchpad Agency and Early Bird Studios. We do actually have a lot of experts. We encourage you to check out both our Indiegogo's Education Center and our experts directory for resources that help you produce videos for your campaign, either yourself or with the assistance of vendors who have had a lot of success working with other Indiegogo partners. So, all right. And then we've got another question from John here for you, Pierce. Do you think going to market with 3D prints is viable, or using only injection molding?
It really depends on what the product is and kind of the units that you see. It is definitely doable. The thing with 3D printing is, of course, if you're trying to have it, a smooth finish, it actually takes a lot of work. I mean, you can sand it down and paint it potentially and make it look really finished, but of course, think of the amount of time that's in that, as well as if you're doing a certain amount of units, it is actually cost beneficial to do injection molding, just because it takes so long to 3D print a single object, as well as paying for the electricity, the wear on the machine, and of course the cost of the actual plastic that you're using. So generally 3D printing is great for prototyping, just becomes really difficult even above 10 or 50 units. It becomes really difficult to actually get enough that you can produce and send to your customers.
Great. Thanks, Pierce. I had a couple questions about, can you join the program with just an idea, with just a concept? Yes, that is true. However, you can join the program at any stage, and that includes that concept stage. That said, you will not be able to be certified until you have a design, you have an actual finished product design that can be reviewed by Aero. And then also, in addition, related to that question, Scott does ask, well, is there a certain level of maturity recommended for a prototype before entering the program? Even if it's not required. So Pierce, any thoughts on that?
No, not at all. The whole point of the program is really to help people that get stuck in any stage of this. So a lot of people do get stuck in really every single stage, and we're here to either give you some homework that pushes you through that struggle, or give you the recommendations, that knowledge base that you struggle to find, so you can make those next steps. So if you don't know where to start with a concept, we'll talk about your idea and what you can do to move forward in the development, which in turn pushes you through the certification program as well.
Thanks very much, Pierce. I do believe some of the questions are getting very specific. We're able to answer more specific inquiries about your actual products, if you join their certification program or if you're already in it. Again, that email is indiegogo@aero.com. So I think we're about done, wrapped up here. We've had about a half an hour of questions. So thank you, everyone. And just, to Ali, Aero's based in, their headquarters are in Denver, but they are a global company, a global technology company. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Thank you, Pierce, for being our speaker today on prototyping. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions. And if you would like to, please do join the Aero certification program. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Joan.